My name is Benjamin Crawford, and I'm 64 years old now. This story takes place 9 years ago, when I was 55, and had finally achieved everything the business. World measures success by while losing everything that actually mattered. I was the CEO of Crawford Technologies, a software company I'd built from scratch in my 20s that had grown into a billion-dollar enterprise. I had the corner office, the luxury penthouse, the vacation homes, the expensive cars. I'd been featured in business magazines, invited to speak at conferences, courted by investors and competitors alike. By every external measure, I'd won at life. But I'd also been divorced twice. My first marriage had ended when my wife grew tired of coming second to my company. My second had lasted longer, but ended for essentially the same reason. I was married to my work, not to her. I had no children, a decision I'd made in my 20s and never reconsidered, until it was too late to change. My parents had passed away years earlier, and I'd lost touch with most of my siblings, our relationships casualties of my single-minded focus on building an empire. At 55, I found myself sitting alone in my beautiful, empty penthouse most nights, wondering what I'd actually accomplished. The company would survive without me. The money meant nothing with no one to share it with. The accolades felt hollow when there was no one who truly knew me, who cared about me beyond my net worth or business connections. My assistant, Margaret, had been gently suggesting for months that I should try dating again. "You're not too old to find companionship," she'd say. "You're not even too old to find love if you just let yourself be open to it." I'd always dismissed her suggestions with vague excuses about being too busy or too set in my ways. But one afternoon, after a particularly lonely weekend, I admitted to her that maybe she was right. Maybe I should at least try. "I know someone," Margaret said immediately, her face lighting up. "My neighbor's daughter. She's lovely, and she's been through a difficult time. I think you two might have a lot to talk about." I was skeptical, but I agreed to a blind date. Margaret arranged it for a Saturday afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown, a place casual enough to not feel like too much pressure. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit, and ordered a coffee while I waited. The cafe was moderately busy with the weekend lunch crowd. Families occupied several tables, couples sat in cozy corners, and a few solo patrons worked on laptops or read books. I sat at a table by the window, watching people pass on the street, feeling both hopeful and foolish. A blind date at 55 felt ridiculous, but what other options did I have? At precisely 2 o'clock, a young woman entered the cafe. She was in her late 20s, I guessed, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical style and wearing a simple light blue dress. She was pretty in an understated way, but what caught everyone's attention was the baby she carried in her arms. An infant, maybe 6 or 7 months old, wearing a matching light blue outfit with a tiny headband. The woman looked around nervously, spotted me at my table, and walked over. I stood uncertain as she approached. "Benjamin Crawford?" she asked. "Yes, you must be Claire Morrison, Margaret's neighbor's daughter." She shifted the baby slightly in her arms. "I'm so sorry. I know this is incredibly awkward, but my babysitter canceled at the last minute, and I couldn't reach you to reschedule. I understand completely if you want to leave. This was probably a terrible idea anyway." I noticed people at nearby tables watching us, some with curious expressions, others with barely concealed amusement. I could read their thoughts clearly. A blind date with a baby? How desperate or foolish could this man be? A younger version of myself might have made excuses and left. That Benjamin would have seen only the inconvenience, the breach of dating etiquette, the potential embarrassment. But at 55, having learned the hard way what really mattered, I found myself saying, "It's fine. Please sit down. Would you like something to drink? Something for the baby?" Claire looked surprised, then relieved. "Really? You don't mind?" "Everyone has childcare emergencies. Sit, please." She sat down across from me, settling the baby on her lap. The infant looked around with wide, curious eyes, occasionally reaching for things on the table. Claire gently redirected her tiny hands, a practiced motion that spoke of long months of constant vigilance. "Her name is Sophia," Claire said. "She's 7 months old. And before you ask, yes, I'm a single mother. Margaret told you that, right?" "She mentioned it," I said carefully. "She said you'd been through a difficult time." Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one way to put it. My fiancé left when I was 5 months pregnant. Said he wasn't ready to be a father, that I'd trapped him, all the usual cliches. I haven't heard from him since. No child support, no involvement, nothing. So yes, it's been difficult. She said this matter-of-factly, but I could hear the pain underneath. This was someone who'd been hurt deeply and had learned to armor herself with blunt honesty. I'm sorry, I said. That must have been devastating. It is. But Sophia is worth everything. She looked down at the baby with such fierce love that it was almost painful to witness. I wouldn't trade her for anything, not even to have him back. Sophia reached out and grabbed my finger where it rested on the table. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and she looked up at me with those large, curious eyes, studying my face with an intensity that made me smile. She likes you, Claire said, sounding surprised. She's usually pretty wary of strangers. Maybe she senses I'm harmless, I said, gently moving my finger so Sophia could watch it move. She followed the motion with her eyes, fascinated. We ordered lunch, and Claire apologized repeatedly for the awkwardness of eating while holding a baby. I watched her juggle her food and Sophia with the exhausted competence of someone who'd been doing it alone for months. She'd take a bite, bounce Sophia to keep her content, wipe spit up off her shoulder, take another bite, all while trying to maintain a conversation. You know what? I said. Why don't you let me hold her while you eat? You deserve to have a meal with both hands free. Claire looked at me as if I'd suggested something impossible. You want to hold her? If you're comfortable with it. I may not have children of my own, but I held my nieces and nephews when they were babies. I think I remember the basics. Claire hesitated, clearly torn between suspicion and desperate hope. Finally, she carefully transferred Sophia to me. The baby came willingly, settling into my arms with surprising ease. She looked up at me, studied my face seriously for a moment, then broke into a gummy smile that made something in my chest tighten. I found myself automatically rocking her gently, the way I remembered doing with my brother's children decades ago. Sophia grabbed my tie and tried to put it in her mouth. I gently redirected her, offering my finger instead, which she immediately gripped with both tiny hands. She really does like you, Claire said, and now she sounded almost emotional. She usually fusses with anyone who isn't me, but she looks completely content. She's beautiful, I said, and meant it. There was something about the weight of this small person in my arms, the trust with which she relaxed against me, that awakened something I'd thought long dead, the desire to protect, to nurture, to be someone's safe harbor. Claire finally began eating properly, and as she did, we talked. Really talked in a way I hadn't talked to anyone in years. She told me about her life, how she'd been working toward becoming a nurse when she got pregnant, how she'd had to drop out of school to work full-time, how she was barely making ends, meet with her job as a medical receptionist, while trying to save to eventually finish her degree. It's exhausting, she admitted. Working full-time, taking care of Sophia alone, trying to afford daycare and rent and everything else. Some days I don't know how I'm going to make it. But then Sophia smiles at me, or she learns something new, and I remember why I'm doing this. You're remarkably strong, I said. Not everyone could handle what you're dealing with. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding it together most of the time. She paused, then laughed softly. I'm sorry. This is probably the worst first date in history. I bring my baby, complain about my life, and make you do childcare while I eat. This is actually the best date I've had in years, I said honestly. At least it's real. No pretense, no performance. Just two people having an honest conversation. Sophia had fallen asleep in my arms, her small body warm and heavy with trust. I found myself looking down at her, at the way her tiny hand still clutched my finger even in sleep, and feeling something I couldn't quite name. Loss, maybe, for the children I'd never had, or perhaps gratitude for this unexpected moment of connection. You're good with her, Claire said softly. She doesn't fall asleep for anyone but me usually. You must have the magic touch. Or maybe she's just exhausted from being alert in a new environment. Maybe, but I think it's you. There's something calm about you. Steady. She feels safe. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, Claire finishing her meal while I held her sleeping daughter. The people at nearby tables had stopped watching with amusement and now looked on with something closer to approval or sentimentality. The story had changed from ridiculous blind date to something sweeter, something that spoke to the basic human need for connection and care. When it was time to leave, Claire carefully took Sophia back, trying not to wake her. We walked out of the cafe together, and she turned to me on the sidewalk. "Benjamin, thank you. For not running away when you saw the baby. For being kind. For letting me have a normal conversation with another adult for an hour. You have no idea how much I needed that." "I should be thanking you," I said. "For trusting me with your daughter. For being honest about your situation. For reminding me what actually matters. Would you—" She hesitated. "Would you want to do this again sometime? Maybe next time I'll actually have a babysitter." I surprised myself by saying, "I'd like that. But I'd also be happy to include Sophia. She's part of your life. There's no reason to pretend otherwise." Over the following weeks, Claire and I began seeing each other regularly. Not exactly dating in the traditional sense, but building something that felt more real than any relationship I'd had before. I'd come to her small apartment bringing dinner so she didn't have to cook. I'd hold Sophia while Claire showered or did laundry or just had a moment to breathe. I found myself looking forward to these visits in a way. I'd never looked forward to anything work-related. Sophia would light up when she saw me, reaching for me with her tiny hands. Claire would relax, the constant tension in her shoulders easing when she had help, when she wasn't alone. One evening, about 2 months into whatever our relationship was becoming, Claire put Sophia to bed and came back to the living room where I was sitting. She'd been quieter than usual that evening, and I'd been giving her space. "Benjamin, I need to ask you something," she said, sitting across from me. "Why are you doing this? Spending time with me and Sophia? You're a successful CEO. You could be dating women without complicated situations, without babies, without all my baggage. Why us?" I thought about how to answer honestly, because when I held Sophia that first day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Connection. The sense that I was doing something that actually mattered. I've spent 30 years building a company, making money, achieving success. And at the end of most days, I go home alone to an empty apartment and wonder what it was all for. I paused, trying to find the right words. "You and Sophia remind me what life is actually about. It's not about quarterly, earnings or stock prices or being featured in business magazines. It's about this, holding a baby while her mother eats a meal with both hands, showing up when someone needs help, being part of something real." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I can't offer you much. I'm broke. I'm exhausted. I'm a package deal with a baby. I'm not the kind of woman men like you usually end up with. Claire, I don't want the kind of woman men like me usually end up with. I've been there, done that, twice. Those relationships were transactions. I provided wealth and status. They provided companionship and social acceptability, but there was no real connection, no depth. With you, I feel like I'm finally being seen for who I actually am. Not what I can provide, but I need things from you," she said. "I need help. Financial help, practical help. Doesn't that make this a transaction too?" "No," I said firmly, "because I'm choosing to give those things freely, not because I'm obligated or because I expect something in return. I'm helping because I want to. Because seeing you and Sophia thrive brings me more joy than anything else I've done in years." That evening marked a turning point. We stopped dancing around what we were becoming and acknowledged it. A family not by traditional means, but by choice and circumstance and genuine care. I helped Claire finish her nursing degree, paying for her education and providing childcare so she could attend classes. I set up a trust fund for Sophia's future. But more importantly, I showed up. I was at Sophia's first birthday party, her first steps. Her first words, one of which was a mangled version of Ben that made my heart swell. Claire and I were married 2 years after that first awkward date at the cafe. Sophia was my flower girl, toddling down the aisle while everyone laughed and cried. I officially adopted her, giving her my name and making legal what had been true in my heart since that first day. She was my daughter in every way that mattered. People sometimes ask me if I regret not having biological children, not starting a family younger. I tell them the truth, no, I don't regret it. Because I needed to be 55 to fully appreciate what I have now. I needed to try and fail at relationships built on surface compatibility. I needed to build a company and achieve worldly success to realize how empty it was without love to share it. I needed to be that particular age, at that particular point in my life, to meet Claire in a cafe and not run when she walked in with a baby. A younger Benjamin would have seen only the complication. The breach of protocol, the potential for judgment. But the Benjamin I'd become saw an opportunity for connection, for purpose, for love. Sophia is 9 now, and while she knows I'm not her biological father, she's never seemed to care. "You're my dad," she told me once when she was 6. "You're the one who showed up. That's what matters." Claire finished her nursing degree and now works in pediatrics at a local hospital. She jokes that she deals with sick children all day and comes home to a healthy one, which is the best of both worlds. We moved into a real house, not my sterile penthouse, but a comfortable family home with a yard where Sophia can play and a room that Claire uses as her art studio. She started painting again when she had time to breathe. I've stepped back from day-to-day operations at the company, though I'm still on the board. I finally learned to put family first, to be present for school events and bedtime stories and weekend pancakes. I've learned that success isn't measured in stock prices, but in a child's laughter, in a partner's smile when you walk through the door, in ordinary moments of connection that add up to an extraordinary life. Sometimes people look at us, at the age gap between Claire and me, at my obvious wealth compared to her working-class background, at the fact that Sophia isn't biologically mine, and I can see them trying to figure out our story to fit us into some recognizable pattern. But the truth is simpler than any of their assumptions. We're just a family, built not from biology or social compatibility or careful planning, but from a baby who gripped my finger with tiny hands, from a mother brave enough to show up with a child to a blind date, from a lonely man who'd finally learned to recognize what actually mattered. That day in the cafe, people laughed when Claire walked in with Sophia. They thought they knew how the story would end, with me making excuses and leaving, with embarrassment all around, with another failed attempt at connection. They couldn't have predicted that holding that baby would change everything, that it would finally awaken something in me, that decades of business success had never touched. Because sometimes the most important moments in life come in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes they come in the form of a young woman, carrying a 7-month-old infant into a cafe, hoping desperately that a stranger will be kind enough not to walk away. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and you've finally learned what actually matters, you don't walk away. You sit down, you order lunch, you hold the baby, and you let yourself be found by the family you didn't know you'd been searching for all along. That's what happened to me that Saturday afternoon 9 years ago. I went to a blind date expecting nothing and found everything. I held a baby in my arms and felt my empty life suddenly become full. I met a struggling, single mother and discovered the partner I'd been unable to find in decades of searching. Margaret likes to take credit for the whole thing. "I knew you two would be perfect together," she says. "You also didn't mention Claire would bring a baby," I remind her. "Details." She waves her hand dismissively. "If I'd told you, you might not have gone." She's probably right about that. The old Benjamin would have found a way to decline, to avoid the complication. But I'm grateful every day that I didn't have that information, that I showed up and was forced to make a choice in the moment. See only the inconvenience or see the opportunity. I chose opportunity. I chose to hold Sophia, to give Claire space to eat a meal in peace, to treat the situation with kindness rather than judgment. And that simple choice changed everything. Now, when I sit at the dinner table with my wife and daughter, when I help Sophia with her homework or listen to Claire, talk about her day at the hospital, when I tuck my daughter in at night and hear her say, "Love you, Dad," I understand what I was really searching for during all those lonely years of building business empires. I was searching for this, for people who need me not for my wealth or my status, but for my presence, for my care, for the simple fact of showing up. For a family that exists not because of obligation or tradition, but because we chose each other, because we saw past the surface to what actually mattered. People sometimes ask if it bothers me that I didn't meet Claire earlier, that I missed Sophia's first 6 months, that I started my family so late in life. I tell them the truth. Every moment feels like a gift precisely because I know how close I came to missing it entirely. If I'd been younger, more conventional, more concerned with what